The moment Jim Tanner pushed that flimsy sheet of paper across the desk, I knew it wasn't good. But I never imagined it would be this bad. A senior mechanic with 15 years in his shop, and he was reducing my pay by 20%. It felt like a casual adjustment to him, but it was a kick to the gut for me. "Jason, you know how much I appreciate you," Jim said, reclining in his leather chair like a corporate magnate. "But these are hard times, and we all have to do our part." I kept my hands flat on the table, refusing to touch the paper. "Hard times," I repeated, my voice steady, my mind cycling through every year I'd spent keeping this business afloat while Jim took all the credit. He smiled, that smug look he wore whenever he thought he was being generous. "You'll still make more than most guys in the industry. I'm sure you understand." Understand? I understood plenty. I knew how many jobs I'd fixed after he'd botched the initial diagnosis. I knew how many customers came back only because they trusted me with their vehicles. And I knew Jim Tanner had never truly worked with his hands in his life. "You're the lifeblood of this place, Jason," he continued. "That's why I need you to get on board. We'll get through this together." "Right," I said, sliding the paper back to him. "But usually, during a storm, the captain doesn't get a bonus while the crew takes a pay cut." His smile twitched, but he didn't challenge me. "Just think about the bigger picture." I stood up. I have been. The instant I walked out of his office, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Jason, this is Karen Wilkes." I recognized the name immediately. She owned Wilkes Automotive, a shop even other mechanics respected. "I've heard you're not exactly thrilled where you are," she said. Her voice was calm and professional, but there was an underlying firmness. "I'm looking for someone to run my shop floor, not as an employee, but as a partner." I leaned against the tool chest, watching Jim through the office window as he talked to a customer, beaming as if he had just won the day. "A partner? You would have a voice in every decision," Karen explained. "Hiring, training, even the work itself. I don't need another body. I need a person who can help me grow this business." I paused before answering. My heart was pounding, but my voice was level. "That's a very big offer." "It's a great one," she replied. "You don't have to decide right now, but you should know I called you first because your reputation speaks for itself." After the call, I put my phone back in my pocket. I looked at the garage bay, smelling the thick air of oil and metal, the same place I had poured years of my life into. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything Jim had said, every condescending smirk, every time he put his name on my work. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just had to wait for the right moment. The next day, I walked into the shop, went to my computer, and sent Karen a short email. "I'm in." The email was barely sent when the familiar sound of the shop pulled me back into my routine. The whine of air tools, the blare of the radio, the scent of coolant and grease clinging to everything. This chaos had felt like home for so long, but recently, it felt like a home with a weak foundation. Jim's management was a slow, painful process. Every decision he made cost us time or money. He would insist on the cheapest parts and ignore the proper service schedules, then act surprised when cars kept coming back with the same problems. I'd lost track of how many jobs I'd secretly redone after hours just to keep customers from leaving. The other guys on the crew saw it, but no one said a word. Most of them had families to feed and couldn't afford to cross Jim. The most frustrating part was how he believed his own hype. Last month, he'd told Mrs. Ellison that her brake issue was resolved after he'd installed some cheap rotors without checking the calipers. She came back 2 days later with the same grinding noise. Jim wasn't there, so I fixed it myself. The caliper was completely seized. I fixed it, called her personally, and sent her on her way in a car that was actually safe to drive. 2 days after that, Jim strode into break room, boasting about how he had single-handedly saved the day. "That's how you build customer loyalty, boys," he'd said with a smug grin, as if he were a master professor. I bit my tongue, clenching my fists under the table. It was always like that. My work, his credit, my relationships, his profit. By mid-afternoon, with my arms deep inside a timing belt job, sweat dripping down my back. I saw him through the bay doors. He was standing with a clipboard, nodding along to a supplier representative like he ran a high-end dealership. I knew that supplier. We had gotten rush orders from him for years because of the trust one had built. Jim couldn't even name half the people in the warehouse, but he would still sign his name on the order forms. It hit me then, that slow, simmering anger I had been ignoring for months. I wasn't just a mechanic here anymore. I was a puppet propping up someone else's ego. One of the younger techs, Robbie, came over. "Hey, the boss wants to know if he can stay late. A VIP customer is coming in." I wiped my hands and looked toward the office. "Let him handle it," I said. Sounds like his area of expertise. Robbie chuckled, but I wasn't joking. This wasn't just frustration anymore. It was pure clarity. I had skills Jim couldn't buy and a network he couldn't fake, and I wasn't going to let him exploit them anymore. That night, after I locked up, I sat in my truck with the engine idling and started a list in my notebook. Contacts, key customers, suppliers who actually returned my calls. Every small detail that made this business run. By the time I turned the truck off, the page was already half full. I wasn't just thinking about leaving anymore. I was meticulously planning my exit so that Jim wouldn't see it coming until I was long gone. By Monday morning, the list in my notebook had evolved into a comprehensive plan. Everything I'd need once I left. All that remained was making it official. I typed my resignation letter at my desk before the bays opened. A professional tone, 2 weeks' notice, and not a single word about the real reason for my departure. I printed it, signed it, and walked straight into Jim's office. He looked up from his monitor, looking confused. "What's this?" "My notice," I said, placing the paper on his desk. He smiled faintly. "Jason, come on. You're overreacting. If this is about the pay cut, we can talk. I can work something out, a promotion, maybe even a raise later on." I kept my hands in my pockets. "It's not about that." "Then what is it?" he pushed. "I'm moving on," I said flatly. He leaned back, trying to appear nonchalant but failing miserably. "The industry is small, you know. You don't want to burn any bridges." I met his gaze. "It's a good thing I'm leaving the bridge standing." That made him flinch. "Fine," he said, "but I expect you to finish your work and not try to poach my customers." I didn't bother to respond. I simply left his office and started packing my tools, notebooks, and the coffee mug that had sat on my workbench for years. By midday, his fake charm had been replaced by quiet hostility. He would hover around the bays, watching me and throwing out petty insults. "Hope you find a place that can put up with your independence." I just ignored him. My relationships with customers weren't built on his approval, and we both knew it. As I loaded the last box into my truck at the end of the day, he came out to the lot. "You're making a mistake, Jason. Out there, you're just another mechanic. Here, you had a name." I closed the tailgate. "Funny," I said. "I thought it was your name on everything I did." He had no reply. I got into my truck, started the engine, and pulled onto the street. My phone buzzed on the seat next to me. A text from Dave Willis, one of my oldest clients. "Heard you're leaving. I've got a job for you, if you're up for it." I smiled as the old shop disappeared in my rearview mirror. I wasn't headed for uncertainty. I was driving directly into demand. On my first day, Karen handed me a set of keys. "It's yours now, Jason. I'll handle the business side. You make this place run." I stepped into shop bay, immediately spotting a dozen things Jim would have deemed good enough that were slowing the crew down. Within the first week, we reorganized the workstations, upgraded the scheduling system, and got rid of the cheap, unreliable parts Jim had favored. "It feels like we can finally breathe in here," said Marco, one of the techs Karen had kept on. "That's the point," I told him. "We work smarter, keep the customers happy, and the rest takes care of itself." And it did. Jobs were completed faster, and callbacks dropped to almost zero. Every customer who left knew exactly who had worked on their vehicle, and they freely gave me credit. A couple weeks later, I heard the familiar sound of a diesel truck pull up. Dave Willis climbed out with his signature big grin. "Never thought I'd see you under a different roof, Jason," he said. "A better one." I replied, shaking his hand. He didn't waste any time. I've got 3 trucks in my fleet that need servicing. You up for it? Always. Word spread quickly. Within a month, half a dozen old clients walked through our door. They'd shake their heads, complaining about the mess Jim was making back at the old place. I didn't have to ask questions. I knew. Karen noticed a shift, too. You weren't kidding about your customer base, she said one afternoon, flipping through the week's appointments. They would follow you anywhere. That's because I don't give them excuses, I said. Business and morale kept climbing. The crew knew they could take their time and do the job right without a manager hounding them about labor hours. Our parts suppliers started prioritizing our orders because they knew we paid on time and never cut corners. But every time a satisfied customer said, "Glad to have you back," I couldn't help but picture Jim scrambling to keep his business afloat. I hadn't seen him since I left, but I knew him well enough to imagine the forced smiles, the fake confidence, and the slow, creeping panic. One Thursday evening, my phone buzzed. The caller ID made me pause. It was Dave Willis again. I had just finished his last job. "Jason," he said, his voice low, "things are really bad over there. They mess up another job, and the guy is threatening to sue. Jim's acting like it's under control, but trust me, it's not." I leaned back in my chair, the quiet hum of the shop in the background. Sounds like he's finally getting what he deserves. Dave chuckled tiredly. "If I were you, I'd get ready. People are about to come knocking." Dave's warning was an understatement. Within a week, I was hearing about it from every direction. Customers walked in shaking their heads, telling me how disorganized the old shop had become. They had my car for 4 days. One man grumbled, arms crossed. Finally got it back, and the problem was still there. You know who I asked for? You. They told me you weren't with the company anymore, as if I didn't already know where you'd gone. It wasn't just customers. Vendors I had dealt with for years started calling me instead of Jim. "Hey, Jason," one supplier said, "I figured I'd offer you this discount before I run it by Tanner. He's been slow to pay, and honestly, I'd rather deal with someone who actually answers their calls." It hit me then just how deep my professional network ran. I had been the face of that shop for so long that most people never even bothered to talk to Jim unless they had to. The most difficult part was when I started bumping into old coworkers. I ran into Robbie at the gas station one morning. He looked exhausted. "Man, it's a mess over there," he said, leaning against his car. "Jobs are stacking up. Parts orders are wrong half the time. And Tanner's blaming everyone but himself." I nodded, keeping my tone neutral. "Are you thinking about leaving?" He shrugged. "A couple of us are, but you know..." "Yeah, I know." I wasn't going to poach them. If they wanted out, they'd have to make the call themselves. Back at our shop, business continued to climb. Every time I thought the rush might slow down, another familiar name appeared on the schedule. It wasn't all perfect. We still had deadlines, warranty claims, and the usual headaches. But here, the problems were solved instead of ignored. One afternoon, I got a call from one of the bigger fleet clients I had worked with at Jim's. The guy sounded tense. "Jason, I need to ask you something straight. If I cancel our contract with Tanner, can you handle the work? That's a lot of vehicles." I said, "Are you sure you want to pull the plug like that? Let's just say I've been paying for a service I'm not getting. Last month, 3 of our trucks went down with the same issue after they supposedly fixed it. I can't keep losing money just to give them a chance to figure it out." I leaned back in my chair, glancing at the bays where the crew was working on another busy day. If you send them here, they'll be fixed correctly the first time. That's what I needed to hear. When I hung up, I sat there for a minute, letting it all sink in. Jim wasn't just losing jobs. He was losing the contracts that kept his lights on. And from the way the calls were picking up, this was just the beginning. The week after that fleet client pulled their contract, Jim came unhinged. I started hearing from people around town that he was pacing the shop floor, yelling orders, and snapping at anyone who asked a question. One morning, Robbie called me from the old shop's parking lot. "You're not going to believe this. Tanner's telling customers you've been calling around trying to steal their business." I laughed into the phone. And do they believe him? Not a single one. Robbie said. They're walking right past him and asking where you are. By then, we were swamped at Karen's shop. The phone never stopped ringing. Clients I hadn't heard from in years were booking work. Transmissions, fleet maintenance, even full restorations. Some even admitted they had been waiting on repairs until they could get to me. We signed 2 new commercial accounts that month. Karen looked at the numbers and shook her head. If this keeps up, we'll need more bays. And it did. Every time Jim lost a client, there was a good chance they would be in my shop within the week. One afternoon, my phone buzzed again. It was Mark, a longtime client who ran a small delivery company. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Jim just called me, swearing you stole my account. He said if I didn't stick with him, he'd take legal action." I leaned against the workbench. "You told him where to shove it, right?" "Of course," Mark said. "I told him. It's my choice where my trucks go, but you should know he sounded desperate." Desperate was putting it mildly. The word going around was that he had cut hours for the remaining techs, and that the parts shelves were half empty because suppliers weren't extending him credit anymore. Robbie stopped by our shop one Saturday morning. He looked around like he was on another planet. "Man, this place is alive," he said. "Over there, it's a ghost town. Tanner's trying to save money by raising prices, and all he's doing is driving more people away." I shook my head. Guess he never learned the difference between profit and greed. "You could buy him out for pennies right now," Robbie said with a half smile. "Not interested," I told him. "I don't want his mess anywhere near here." Still, I kept tabs on the old place. Not for revenge, but because the pattern was so obvious now. Without me there to hold it together, it was falling apart faster than even I had expected. By the end of the month, another vendor called asking if we could take over a service contract Jim had been botching for months. Everything he touches lately turns into a callback. The guy said, "You're the only one I trust to handle this without a circus." "Send it over," I told him. When I hung up, Karen was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "You realize he's not coming back from this, right?" I nodded. "He's doing the damage all by himself." And I meant it. I wasn't out there twisting the knife. I was too busy keeping our own operation moving. Jim's final attempt to stop the bleeding hit the rumor mill 2 days later. He had hiked prices across the board, telling customers it was a necessary step to ensure quality. The quality hadn't improved, but the walkouts had. By the weekend, I heard he was down to 2 techs, neither of them certified. The collapse wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. The industry expo was buzzing with activity, rows of booths, the smell of coffee, and the constant hum of sales pitches. I was talking to a parts representative when I heard my name bellowed across the aisle. "Jason!" I turned, and there was Jim Tanner, marching toward me like he still owned the place. His shirt collar was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his eyes darted nervously at the people turning to watch. "You think you're so clever?" he started, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. "You walk out, you got my business, and then you stand here like nothing happened." I stayed where I was, my hands in my pockets. "Jim, you're a snake," he hissed. "You took my clients, my vendors. You sabotaged me." A few people had stopped pretending not to listen. I could see faces from old suppliers and shop owners I had known for years. I kept my tone level. "You didn't lose your business because of me. You lost it because you didn't know how to run it." That stung him. His face turned red, but he continued. "I built that shop." "You inherited a sign over the door," I said. "The rest of it, that was my work. You didn't keep it alive. You bled it dry." The circle of listeners grew tighter. Someone whispered behind me, and a few others just folded their arms, waiting to see what would happen next. Jim jabbed a finger at me. "You're going to regret this." "No," I said, still calm. "I'm going to go back to my shop and keep doing my job. You should try that." For a moment, the only sound was the buzz of the expo floor. Then an older shop owner stepped forward, giving Jim a look I had seen 100 times when a customer caught him in a lie. "Maybe it's time you stop blaming other people," the man said. That hit harder than anything I had said. Jim's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced around at the faces, none of them sympathetic, and straightened his tie as if it would fix something. "I've got work to do," I said, breaking the silence. I turned back to my conversation with the parts rep. Behind me, the crowd began to disperse. A few shook their heads. Jim didn't follow. He just stood there, a small figure in the middle of the aisle, looking like he had finally figured out the truth he had been avoiding for years. I didn't need to gloat. His own humiliation was doing the job for me. 6 months later, the shop felt like a different world. We had doubled our client list. The bays were booked out weeks in advance, and Karen was already talking about opening a second location. I still worked the floor most days, but I also spent just as much time making decisions that were actually shaping the business. One Thursday morning, I was reviewing the schedule when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Jason Miller?" A deep voice asked. "That's me. This is Tom Garrison, Regional Director for North Point Auto Supply. I've been following your work since you left Tanner's place. We're looking for a repair partner to pilot a new program, distribution discounts, national marketing, the works. Your name keeps coming up." I leaned back in my chair. "What exactly are you offering?" "A partnership," he said, "not just supplying parts. We want to feature your shop as a model operation in our network. That means expansion, equipment upgrades, and exclusive contracts." It took a second for it all to sink in. I had gone from being the guy who got his paycheck cut without warning to the guy they wanted to represent a national brand. "Let's set up a meeting," I said. After I hung up, Karen was leaning against the doorway, her eyebrow raised. "Good news?" "You could say that," I told her, filling her in. She grinned. "I told you people would notice." They had. My name was appearing in trade publications. I had been invited to speak at a regional mechanics conference, and suppliers treated us like their top account. Meanwhile, Jim was just a ghost in the industry. I had heard from a parts rep that he had sold what was left of his shop to a bigger chain and tried to manage one of the locations. That lasted 3 months before they mutually agreed to part ways. A month ago, an industry insider told me flat out, "Jim Tanner's done. He couldn't manage a tire rotation if you handed him the lug wrench." I didn't waste a second thinking about him. Now, with North Point's offer on the table, the future wasn't just about keeping the shop running. It was about growing it into something bigger than I ever could have imagined when I first picked up a wrench. Karen came over, coffee in hand. "So are we doing this?" I looked out at the bays, the crew working in sync, customers smiling, the productive hum of a shop that actually ran the way it should. "Yeah," I said, "we're doing this." My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I answered, "Jason Miller, we heard you might be expanding. We want to talk investment." I smiled. Doors weren't just opening. They were wide open.